So next we're going to move on and talk a little bit about teacher effectiveness and teacher quality. We're down one of our panelists, so I'm going to abuse my authority here and lead off a little bit just quickly about what we've been doing in Maine, and then we'll turn it over to the panel here to give us a little more of a national perspective. Last session, the legislators who are here know we passed a major piece of legislation on teacher and leader effectiveness. It allowed the state to adopt standards around teacher and leader effectiveness and then required school districts to put evaluation systems in place that meet those standards. We know already there's a ton of work going on in districts. I've seen so many superintendents here today. I know a lot of you are working very, very hard on this. We've been working since the bill passed last summer with a group, the Maine Educator Effectiveness Council, of which there are some members here today, who've been working with us, teachers, principals, administrators, all kinds of folks, public members, trying to think about how do we operationalize these evaluation systems so that we have them in place. There's a phased timeline. It goes in over a few years. Our job is really this year to get the standards in place, get the state so that we're ready to go to try and help districts implement these evaluation systems. The districts will have next year to start building or adapting the systems they have or starting new systems. They have another year to pilot them, and then we implement them the year following that. So we're on a phased implementation. But we're very excited about it, and it's been great for me to travel around the state and get a sense of what districts are doing around teacher evaluation and really focus. And when we were doing the public hearing, we had a superintendent who came to the public hearing and said, you know, the thing I like about this is that we are going to spend more time as a result of this law looking at what makes effective teaching and school leadership work. I know, especially the administrators that are in here, when you're in a school and you're trying to run a school like this, and there's so many concerns and things you have to worry about, kids parking and people like us barging in and taking over the place, there isn't that much time to focus on that. But we know, and I think we're going to hear today from our panelists what the research tells us about how absolutely critical educator effectiveness is, teacher quality, leadership quality inside buildings at the district level. The research is overwhelming that these are massive, massive pieces in terms of the impact on the quality of schools and the quality of education our kids receive. So we did pass a bill bipartisanly, unanimous from the Education Committee, unanimous in the House, unanimous in the Senate, signed by the governor. Very proud of that piece of legislation from last session. We're working very hard to implement it. So with that as kind of your background, I'm going to step aside. I'm going to turn turn our attention over to the panel. And we're going to lead off with, right here next to me is Kate Walsh, who's the president of the National Council on Teacher Quality. They do a tremendous amount of work. They've been a huge resource for us, looking at our policies as we were working on this piece of legislation last session. We went back and forth on email a few times as we were thinking about what works in other states, what's going to be workable for Maine, what are the pieces we need to focus on, and Kate's team was extraordinarily helpful. And then we'll also hear from Eric Laram, who's at Students First, again, a national level entity that's really working on the ground in states, looking at best practices, looking at ways to share what works. I'm really looking forward to both of these panelists giving us a sense of how important teacher and leader effectiveness is, what kind of work is going on in states across the nation, where we see this going over the next few years, and why this matters for our kids and for kids like Mohammed. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Kate Walsh. Thank you.
Good morning. I just got here a few minutes ago, a little frazzled. Eric came up to me and said, "What is wrong with you?" And I said, I've had quite a week. I just came in from Oakland yesterday, so a little bit change in climate from Oakland to here. And while I was out there, I was out for my pathetic version of a run. I'm trying to learn how to run. And doing that couch to 5K. Anybody here tried that? Yeah, a few people. Anyway, so I'm on week 4. We'll have to trade notes. But I'm out running and got hit by a car. So I'm a crazy week, but I'm fine. I was fine. The SUV braked right when it touched me. So I'm going to see if I can put together something that's coherent for you today. And if I'm not, you're going to let me know, okay? Okay, so this is going to be interesting. That would be much better. Okay.
Bring that up.
It's not on.
They're going to turn it up.
Great. Okay. I'll wait for it to come. There we go. Okay. So when I talk about getting Maine's teaching force ready for the Common Core, I'm really speaking today to the demands that this is going to place on teachers and what the implications are for both the new teachers coming into the profession and those folks who are already here, the kinds of things that will serve to enhance the state's ability to deliver the level of education that's going to be required of the Common Core, because I doubt if states had any idea what they're getting into when they adopted the Common Core. It's when we start to really understand what it means, it's a lot more sophisticated and complicated than we may have once thought. So this is something probably everybody in this room is aware of, the power of a really great teacher. If you take a first grader and assign him year in and year out to the average teacher, by the end of 8th grade, he is an average kid reading at 8th grade level. But a child who has the good fortune of being assigned very effective teachers, highly effective teachers, that child could be reading at the 11th grade level just by virtue of the instruction that he or she receives from that teacher. And then unfortunately the child who is assigned to very ineffective teachers year in and year out, just by virtue of having been assigned to those ineffective teachers, that child would only be reading at the 4th grade level. So it's a tremendous difference between 4th and 11th grade reading levels, obviously. So you can see the kind of good fortune we have in that we do have an ability to bring kids along much, much farther than we might otherwise think, just by making sure that we put them in classrooms with very effective teachers. Okay, so oops. Okay. Here's a bit of the bad news. Those teachers who can add a year and a half's worth of learning each year instead of a year, they are about 15% of our workforce. Okay, so these are superstars. These are teachers who can really consistently perform miracles in the classroom. And just technically speaking, these are teachers who can perform one standard deviation above the mean. And the teachers who are at the other end of this spectrum, who are performing one standard deviation below the mean, they're only adding about half a year's worth of learning. So that's the difference between really great teachers and really weak teachers, a whole year of learning. Okay, so what does that mean in our classrooms? What's this challenge mean for all of us? That means about 1 in 7. There's a 1 in 7 chance of being assigned one of these great teachers in any single year. For us to close the achievement gap, you need to have these superstar teachers assigned to kids for 5 to 7 years in a row. That's the kind of learning impact that we need to have. So that chances are 1 in 17,000. So the challenge for the country together is to try to figure out a way to get more superstar teachers, but also to raise everybody's game, so that average teachers are good teachers are great, and great teachers become these superstars. All right, so one of the things I like to emphasize with folks is when we look at teacher quality, it's the institutions that shape our ability to have a high quality teacher in the classroom. The policies and practices that we put in place are directly related to our ability to deliver a high-quality teaching force. And most paramount are states. States have more authority over teacher quality than any other institution that you might think of, including districts and the way they manage their teachers. That matters, but not as much as what happens with states. Contracts from unions, they matter, but they don't matter as much as what states are doing. And then also higher education. And they are responsible for preparing our next generation of teachers. So what they do in the classroom and how they do it with new teachers is extremely important. All right, so states have a ton of authority. I think probably everyone in this room, I think you guys are all educators. I mean, you probably know better than I do what impact the state does have on you. Oops. Scuba didn't happen. So let's look a little bit at Maine, and if I get something wrong, you're going to correct me, right? I might not be totally up to date. Okay, so in terms of what's happened with teacher preparation, this is something that NCTQ is extremely interested in. We are actually going to be rating teacher preparation programs for the first time ever, coming out. U.S. News and World Report. Spotlight. U.S. News and World Report is going to be publishing those results this summer. And so you will, for the first time, those of you who are running districts will be able to access the quality of training that a prospective candidate has, which is information I know that a lot of school districts have wanted over the years. Okay, so, well, now we can't see the slide, so that might be a problem. So anyway, one of the things states can do is they can make sure teachers learn how to teach reading. And states that have done this by imposing standards, by telling their ed schools that this is what you need to do, they've had almost no luck at persuading those ed schools to do so. So what is more effective is if a state imposes a really strong test on all candidates who want to become qualified to teach in elementary schools. And that is a test that, if it's a good test, verifies whether an elementary teacher really has the knowledge that will allow him or her to be an effective reading instructor. Now, if you can sort of make your way through the light here, there are about 10 states that have a really good, strong test. This is a standalone test. Maine has no test that I'm aware of, and there are about 8 states that have a weak test. So when I say a weak test, that generally means that there's a few questions thrown into a bigger, broader test. Let's look at mathematics knowledge. Again, here Maine is part of a group that has a weak test in elementary math knowledge. A lot of us here have gotten very concerned with STEM issues and our ability to really bring kids along and make ourselves globally competitive on STEM subjects. If anyone's under any delusions about where this all begins, it's so important that we start taking mathematics more seriously in the elementary grades and laying those foundational skills. It's too late when kids get to 6th, 7th, 8th grade to suddenly get very interested and committed to mathematics. Unfortunately, there is a sentiment in teacher preparation that if you're not good at teaching math, if you're not good at math, you should become an elementary teacher. And nothing could be further from the truth. So we look very closely at what kind of mathematics trainings preparation programs are providing. And time after time, we're seeing very inadequate attention to the kind of math knowledge elementary teachers need to have. So again, the best way for states to deal with this is to start looking at a really good math test. So that elementary candidates cannot get a license in their state to teach unless they know this mathematics. So this is something that we think that Maine would want to very strongly consider. Just in general terms, oversight of teacher preparation is extremely important for any state. We have in the nation, we have about 1,450 teacher preparation programs, and by everyone's account, certainly not just NCTQ's, there is large and widespread dysfunction in many of those programs. They are not delivering to school districts the teachers that they need. So one of the early findings we looked at to see whether teacher preparation programs are adequately selective, and we're finding across the board that they are not adequately selective. And I don't mean that they have Ivy League standards. We just mean, are they in the top half? Is the institution verifying that they're in the top half of their college attending class from high school? Finland does the top 10%. We're just asking for the top 50%. And almost all the institutions in Maine currently have lower standards than that. That's just not acceptable. And then if we want to get serious about getting to the Common Core, elementary teachers need to have broad content knowledge. We have very weak content. In Maine, there are very weak content standards for elementary teachers. And as I said before, inadequate licensing tests. Right now, you have a loophole in the state that allows someone with a K-8 teaching license to teach in middle school. So that means they're not spending the time in the course of their preparation to, here we go again, to really learn their science or math or English, literature, or social studies. When you're doing that, you really, when you're putting people in the classroom with an elementary license who are supposed to be teaching pretty advanced subject matter, 7th and 8th grade subject matter, you run the risk of having very weak instruction. Okay, so enough on teacher prep. Ouch. Let's talk about evaluation. This is probably something that's on more states' minds these days than any other topic. Evaluation has gotten to be a very, very hot topic, especially since we realize that it's being done so badly everywhere. We look at district after district, state after state. Teachers are being rated, tend to be rated anywhere between 95 and 99% satisfactory. So we know that nobody is taking evaluations seriously, and there's a lot of reasons for that. But so people are trying to figure out how to do this right, and it isn't easy. I mean, there are a lot of problems with trying to transition into a more meaningful evaluation system, and I know that's what you are struggling with here in Maine. But just very quickly, here are some really sound principles for good evaluation. You want to make sure they're done annually for all teachers, and that's even for great teachers. Everybody needs annual feedback. And the problem with doing that is that you're putting a huge burden on principals if you only allow principals or an assistant principal to do an evaluation. So you want to work towards a strategy of having multiple evaluators. And it's especially important to have third-party evaluators. Those folks who can come in from the district to verify whether a principal is actually doing a good job, to make sure that the third-party evaluation is somewhat correlates with the evaluation of the principal. So all that is extremely important. You want to employ fair but objective measures of student learning. That doesn't need to be just state tests. Teachers are right. A lot of state tests are not very good. So they are right to feel very nervous about being held accountable for it. But on the other hand, these tests still signify whether children are at that 4th grade reading level, 8th grade reading level, 11th grade. They still mean something. So we need to do a better job of building in new good state tests, but there are other factors that can be considered as well. I'm going to show you what I think is one of the more interesting findings. Let's see. Well, this is just something Maine is not requiring yet annual evaluations, but I want to show you this. This, I think, is fascinating research out of the Met study that the Gates Foundation funded, where they tried to see what other measures could be employed that would be fair, but really true measures of student learning. So they decided to ask students how well their teachers, did their teachers really teach well? And your first reaction when you hear that is, you can't do that because kids will say Mrs. Jones is mean, and even though she's a great teacher, but she's really mean, and so everyone's worried it's going to be a personality judgment. But they structured a survey, different levels for different kids. So they have one that they can go from 2nd grade all the way through high school with these questions, and they really ask kids about the environment of the classroom, whether kids are learning, whether, so they're not really so much focusing on the teacher, but is the classroom a good place to be, and is when they need help, do they get help, that kind of thing. So, but when you think about it, the finding that these student learning surveys are so meaningful isn't surprising when you consider when you consider what a principal can do, maybe a couple hours a year looking at a classroom versus all these kids. There's 35 kids. You know, they're watching these teachers 6 hours a day. And I think that a lot of states and districts are seriously considering moving to this strategy. I know Memphis and Hillsborough, I think Boston are all using it. They're learning a lot, and you can learn from them. But this is something that teachers have become very comfortable with in their own in the places that are trying this, and it's something you might well consider. In Maine, tenure is awarded virtually automatically after 3 years. You know, that isn't a very long time, but especially if you're going to consider some objective measures of student performance, to get that data, you kind of have to go in the first 2 years. So it can be a little bit of a problem. But more important than the timeline is how seriously you take this decision. Awarding a teacher tenure is effectively a $2 million decision. You know, you're investing in that person for a very long time to come. It's about a $2 million investment. But too often in school districts, we treat it like we're buying a ream of paper. Or, you know, it's just a casual decision with no consequences. If you're in the classroom at the 3-year mark, boom, you've got tenure. So you want to look for ways to make tenure much more meaningful. And then on compensation, Maine's a pretty good state on this front in that it doesn't get in the business of districts. It stays out of districts. So some states get a lot more in your face with how much you can pay a teacher, and Maine does not do that. But Maine could do more to take on a leadership role to the extent it's able to get districts to consider things like performance pay or pay for shortage areas. I think the thing that people need the most to hear, but higher ed doesn't like me anyway, but they really don't like it when I say this. The amount of time we're spending on getting more advanced credits as teachers is largely of no value. So if there's one piece of research literature, research finding that is absolutely conclusive from the past 50 years, is that we're spending billions and billions and billions of dollars persuading teachers to go get as many credits as they can so they can climb up the salary ladder and get the most pay. And there's almost no payoff from that. There's no relationship between what teachers get in terms of advanced credit and their effectiveness in the classroom. Now, if you think about it, that's not really that startling, because the motivation is to climb the salary ladder or to keep a professional license. The motivation is not to make myself a more effective teacher. So when you do that, you're going to go to find the fastest, cheapest way to get more credit. You're not going to go and take a really hard physics course so you become a better science teacher. So it's not surprising that there's relationship, and it's not surprising that folks thought that this was a good idea. Advanced education, that's a great idea, but it's become almost a perverse incentive, and it's not really, districts are spending a lot of money. So I was just in Oakland this week releasing a big report on the teacher quality policies in that district. And to get to the top of the pay ladder in that district, you have to have the equivalent of 3 master's degrees. So what other profession, now think about it, it's 90 credits. You might have something similar in your district, who knows? But what other profession requires its employees to get 3 master's degrees? You know, it's just gotten a little bit out of control. So the lack of research to support that, as well as the fact that it's gotten so out of control, should make us all pause and step back. Oakland, for its sake, could save $11 million a year and direct it towards things like performance pay and shortage subject pay from those master's degree and get a lot more value for their dollars. So there is a way of redirecting our existing resources to better target teacher quality. Okay, and dismissal. I'm always a little uncomfortable bringing up dismissal because I think it's a big mistake for anyone to have the impression that you're ever going to improve teacher quality by firing a lot of people. I mean, it's just not, it's just not going to happen. It's not the way human beings like to work. It's not a particularly helpful environment where you're always worried about losing your job. On the other hand, there's nothing more demoralizing for a good teacher than having a teacher who is terrible in the room next door, who consistently goes home as soon as the bell rings and her kids aren't learning and she knows she's getting paid the same and she gets away with it, And it's very demoralizing for great teachers, even just good teachers, to have really bad teachers left in the school system and allowed to thrive and still earn a salary. So dismissal does play a role. It's just not going to be something you want to do a lot of, but it is something you need to do. And unfortunately, states have made it so expensive for a district to fire a teacher that the only time you're going to get fired is if you're guilty of a crime. It costs something like $200,000 to dismiss a teacher in many cities, and some people say it's a lot higher than that. So can you imagine being a principal and you need to dismiss a teacher and the district's like, we just don't have the money. That is not and the reason that is because these dismissal cases can go on and on and on through many multiple appeals. Okay, so the biggest problem we see in some of these state laws is that ineffectiveness is not a legitimate reason to fire a teacher. It's not spelled out. When I was just in California, what they had was if you're a member of the Communist Party, you can be fired. If you have tuberculosis, you can be fired. But you can't just be merely incompetent and not good at teaching math. So what happens is when somebody does get dismissed, what happens is that it's treated like they're getting their license revoked. And you have to meet a very high burden. That's a property right when you lose a license. So you have to meet a very high standard to dismiss someone because they're not good at teaching math. So it's really incumbent upon states to make sure that it's not, they do not make it onerous for a district to dismiss a teacher. Now, I gather, Steve, did you guys just change this? The last thing on the law, just state-specified dismissal for multiple unsatisfactory evaluations. Okay. Okay. All right, so that's it for me. And, I think we're going to turn to Eric, allow him to do his talk, and then we'll take some questions. Great, thank you very much.
So I figured out what's going on with the lights. You guys have been to a concert at some point. When the lights are up here and they're going up and down, that means that we're doing something really cool. We're changing up the beat or something. When it goes up for you guys, that's the point for you all to scream and to really go nuts because we're turning the house lights on. So I'll be waiting for that moment. It's kind of a dream come true, to be honest. So I think I'm going to have a slide presentation here, but again, I'm Eric Laram from Students First. We released a national policy report card, state policy report card for all 50 states plus the District of Columbia earlier this year. And what we wanted to do, we wanted to take a look at state policy and which state policies were in place and actually grade states on those state policies. We weren't going to look at student achievement. We weren't going to be grading states on the quality of their schools, the quality of their teachers. What we really wanted to do was actually look at the policies, because when we find that we talk about education policy, particularly state-level policy, people's eyes start to glaze over. There's definitely a disconnect. I think it's, education is such a local issue, and so everybody knows sort of what's happening at their school, their children's school. But when you talk about what the state-level policies are, they're probably not really clear on which policies their particular state has. So we wanted to point that out. We wanted to generate awareness around that. And then we also wanted to generate a cause for action. We wanted to generate some concern and let people know that, look, if these policies that are in place in your state, if you believe, like we do, that most of them need changed, then we can actually create a roadmap for change. So we can talk about which policies are better, which policies would make a state's education policy system stronger, more supportive of teachers, schools, and students. So that's what we did this year. And this is what we came up with. These are the grades. So if you can see it out there, what we only have a couple of states, Louisiana and Florida were the highest graded states, 2 states that earned Bs, handful of Cs, and then the most of the country earned either a D or an F. And that was sort of the distribution. And again, we were pretty harsh graders. It didn't come as a real surprise, though. I think that when you think about education policy, these have been in place for decades. We're talking about laws, we're talking about regulations. They've been in place for decades. They're antiquated policies. And it's really only over the last few years, several years really, that change has really started to happen. So these are the overall state rankings. Again, Louisiana, Florida, Indiana, Rhode Island, Michigan up at the top. Maine right in the top half there. Overall grade was a D. GPA was a 1.23. What I want to point out here is a lot of people think, wow, you give everybody Ds and Fs. But to me, when I look at this, the D really represents change that's happening. The D really, to me, represents the momentum. Because if we were to have done this, say, 5 years ago, I think nearly every state probably would have been somewhere in the F range. What is happening here is that states are beginning to have these conversations. States are beginning to change their policies. A state like Florida has been at it for quite a number of years. And Louisiana, has really rushed through some pretty sweeping reforms just in the last couple of years, Indiana as well. But, another thing that jumps out, a lot of people look at it and say, well, wait a second, Louisiana, we do know that their student achievement, is near the bottom of the country. Some of the other states that are sort of highly graded, student achievement isn't that great. And again, I want to go back to, we're looking at the state policy. So what we're really talking about, Jeannie Allen made a good case earlier for where student achievement is in Maine right now. And so what we're looking at is, what are policymakers willing to do about it? What are you actually prepared to change about your current state policies so that you don't have the low student achievement, so that you don't have the achievement gaps that you have in Maine, that you have in other states? So when we look at Louisiana, Florida, Indiana, those are states that are actually taking some action, they're taking change, and they're doing something about that. Across the policy pillars, we graded the states on our policy agenda at Students First. We have 3 main pillars in our policy agenda. The first is elevating the teaching profession. That's what we'll talk about mostly today. That's really harnessing the impact of a great teacher, and then which policies do we have in place to attract them into the profession, to retain them, reward them, and make it something that that actually ensures that we have the best teachers in the classrooms. Empowering parents with data and choice, making sure that parents have information, they can make informed choices about school performance, classroom performance, and that they have choices available. They have charter schools, they have open enrollment options, voucher programs. And then spending wisely and governing well, really looking at how are the resources used in the state. Do we have the flexibility needed at the local level so that school leaders and school administrators can make the decisions they need, get the resources to the classroom, or are they restricted by sort of antiquated bureaucracy and strings? And do we have actual governance mechanisms? Do we allow governance change? Do we allow mayors to become involved in education? Do we allow the state to become involved in education? And what I see here when I look at this slide, the biggest thing that jumps out is that we really have to think about education reform as a comprehensive problem that we have to tackle. We have to come at it from multiple angles. And right now, no state is really doing that. No state is really coming at it and knocking it out of the park in any certain area. There's a lot of work to be done across the board. So digging into Maine's overall report card a little bit, we looked at where Maine ranked. It was 21st among the 51, C- in elevating the teaching profession, D- in empowering parents, D- in spending wisely, governing well. Again, I think when I go back to and think about what a D is, you think about the change that is happening. And again, Maine is certainly seeing that. I think under the leadership of Governor LePage and Commissioner Bowen, we're seeing that Maine is beginning to have not only that conversation, I think you all have started the conversation, but you're actually beginning the hard work. What that allows you to do is to get past the question of whether we're going to change policies and actually get into the more interesting questions, some of which we'll talk about here. Some policies to highlight. Again, we just had this issue talking about whether or not we are allowing ineffective teachers to remain in the classroom, whether we're allowing districts to keep the best teachers in the classroom. We graded Maine as having a fairly good policy in place because it does at least enable districts to use ineffectiveness as just cause. It enables districts to then remove the teacher from the classroom. Equitable access to facilities for public charter schools, and making sure that there aren't management alternatives or restrictions. So enabling districts, charter schools to join cooperative agreements, and, shared procurement policies, those sorts of things. And then the last is where we'll dig into this teaching profession pillar for us. A lot of the things that Kate talked about in terms of evaluation, I think for us, that's really where it begins, is making sure that we have the actual information, we have meaningful evaluations in place for educators, for teachers and principals. And for us, those are really tied together. You've got to have both in place if you're really going to create an effective system. And all of the multiple measures, the metrics that Kate mentioned, again, are sort of centerpieces of our policy as well. I think that Maine has adopted, an evaluation policy. The commissioner, I think, is going to talk a little bit about where that stands in terms of the regs. We're looking at that. We think that it's a good step. It's a strong step forward. There are some things that I think could be even more rigorous about it in terms of the frequency, making sure that the evaluations are actually happening annually, the amount of student growth, the amount of student learning that's being considered. But again, talking earlier about moving beyond the conversations about whether we're going to do it and getting into the more interesting questions, I think now is the time that the state can actually start talking about what does effective teaching actually look like, what are the instructional practices that should happen in the classroom, and when we think about student growth and student learning, how many data points, which data points can we create so that we can actually have multiple lenses to look at student growth and make that part of the meaningful evaluation system. Those are the conversations that I think you can have now because you are taking these steps. Once you have that information, though, once you have the meaningful evaluations, then of course you have to look at what you're going to do with it and what you're going to do with that information. Are you going to tie it into professional development and make sure that teachers are receiving the targeted feedback so that they can develop and they can improve in the classroom? Are you going to ensure that principals and school leaders are going to be able to have the autonomy, have the authority to use that information for making their personnel decisions? Because again, they have to be able to lead the school. They have to be able to ensure that they have the best teachers in the classroom. So things like, again, making sure that they can remove ineffective teachers, that they can, when it comes to placement and assignment, that they can make those decisions based on the most effective teacher, and making sure that they are the ones that remain in the classroom. The tenure piece that Kate talked about, incredibly important. Again, I think Maine's law is still very weak with regard to tenure. Performance pay and salary schedules, what we're really looking at there is are we going to enable districts, and really are we going to require districts to make sure that they're actually rewarding teachers for the impact they have on student learning. Maine, I think, allows districts to get to performance pay, allows that to happen. There are actually states that don't allow that at all. But I think we want to move to a system where, again, we were talking about, Kate was talking about master's degrees earlier. We want to move to a system where we actually just stop investing in things that don't work. So we stop investing in paying teachers more simply because of the degrees they earn. And we move it toward a system where we're investing in teachers because of the impact they're getting with kids. We should just move to that policy statewide. And then, of course, your pathways, alternatives, teacher certification pathways we look at, and accountability for those. Again, ensuring that we have multiple pathways into the profession, that we actually are able to attract teachers who are coming from different entry points, not necessarily the traditional education programs. But importantly, are you going to hold those programs accountable? Are you going to tie the program rating back to the teacher's performance in the classroom? So, for us, I think the elevating the teaching profession is definitely it's a policy pillar where Maine has made some progress. Again, the leadership there is clear. The work is being done in the state, and we'll continue to support that. But I think that there's still quite a bit of work to do. So, Commissioner, if you want to talk about the work that you're doing.
Folks here know me know I could go on for some time about this, but I won't because the clock is ticking and we've got about 5 or 6 minutes left. So as I said before, we're in the process. Rules are being adopted. We've got some legislation coming up. So this session, there's really going to be some more work done around the effectiveness bill that was passed last year. And we do have some rules that we need to implement that go through the legislative process. So that process is underway. But while we've still got you for a couple of minutes, I guess my question would be, There was a lot on both the sheets. There was a lot of stuff on the to-do list that I'm working on here. I guess the question is, what's the low-hanging fruit? Where do we, if you were to say, you've got a legislative session underway, we've got legislators in the room here, we really want to so we did pass a bill last session, which we're working to implement, but is there another piece is it alternative certification pathways? What would you recommend if we were going to tackle something this session that would be a good piece to go at, that we could really do make some headway on? What would it be?
It's a good question. So I don't know if you noticed the score I had that we had graded your evaluation policy for principals. We think that the principal evaluation is every bit as important as the teacher evaluation. And when we looked at the actual requirements that are there, and again, I think you can actually solve this with the regulations, but ensuring that principals are held accountable not only for the school-wide student achievement and progress, but also in their ability to effectively manage teachers, to develop them. How many effective teachers are they keeping? Are they recruiting? Are they attracting? Those really strong principals are the ones that the very best people want to work for. And so making sure that you require districts to measure that in the principal evaluation, I think that is low-hanging fruit. It's something that I think people can get behind, and we would like to see that spelled out and well articulated. I don't know how easy it's going to be to tackle the tenure decision and the staffing decisions questions. Some states adopt their evaluation system and how they use those evaluations all together. We think that big sweeping change certainly reflects the urgency. Jeannie talked earlier about sort of how long this is all going to take, and so every bit that you can move faster on that is certainly something we would like to see. But recognizing that you're going to begin your pilot. Next year districts are going to be piloting it, and then full implementation in 2015. I would think about going ahead and getting it into the state policy now, that once the full implementation happens, the districts do have to use the evaluations for personnel decisions, because you've got a smart phased-in plan, so why not put it into state law now that you're going to use the data that you get?
Okay.
It's hard to call anything low-hanging fruit when when these are all just very tough battles. There's a lot that needs to be done with evaluation to make sure that it's implemented with integrity. And that's sort of where I come down on this. We can put in a lot of state regs on these issues, and you've tried to get into, you've tried to walk into that, but. One of the big problems is implementation, too.
That's just where I was going to go, because I feel as though we did a lot of the policy heavy lifting. I'm a former legislator, I'm a policy guy, so I came into the job sort of as a policy, we just need to pass the policy. Let's just get the policy in place. Right. And now, of course, we're learning that, and we knew all along, that the implementation is a massive piece of work, especially around this stuff. So, any advice on the implementation front, especially, we've got a big rural state here, people are spread out. It's a local control state. Districts are developing kind of their own evaluation models for teachers and principals. There's some challenges there.
Yeah, probably I think the most important piece for high fidelity implementation is good data. So if you have the ability to look at any school at any time as a superintendent, I'm not talking about as a member of the public, but and know that folks are being evaluated. And not only are they being evaluated, but is the principal adequately distinguishing among the talent in the building? So I would be very concerned if a principal turned in an evaluation report when everybody got the same grade. That's just not how it works. There's no profession in the world where everybody is equally good. So I think that the best way to do this is to make sure superintendents are really talking with their principals, making sure they're well trained in how to do this, that they are adequately checking on principals and making sure the validity of what the principal is doing by sending in their own teams of folks to make sure that their findings correlate. But data is the key, really good data.
And I think you've got some great states to really look at as models here in terms of how they use that data and how they continue to to evolve their own evaluation systems, right? So, making sure that you communicate very clearly that you're going to use that data, that you want to have the conversations with your school leaders, with your teachers, and that you're not afraid to change, you're not afraid to adjust. If you look at Tennessee and DC, sort of early on and out there in terms of implementing this, and they have both made pretty substantial changes to their systems that I think are positive. I think they reflect the feedback and the data that they're getting. Commissioner Bennett's got some issues that he's going to deal with in Florida with their new system, and that's part of the process. But again, you don't get to figuring that out until you've done the policy lift that you all have done. So, not being afraid to change.
You have to be ready for at least a year of a lot of upset and a lot of stories in the newspaper about, oh my God, this teacher's fabulous and she was rated low. I mean, that all comes. We saw that in Tennessee, we saw that in DC. And then it doesn't take very long before teachers are saying, I don't want to go back to the old way of doing things. I kind of like this. You're seeing remarkable calm in these states that have really successfully transitioned over to a more meaningful system. Yeah. But you have to be prepared to ride it. It's a little rough at
Ride
first.
it out.
Change is hard.
Change is hard. Well, on that note, thank you both very much. I appreciate your contributions to the panel. What we're going to do before we get done is we've got a quick video clip we want to show that's part of this because as both of our panelists said, the job here is not simply to evaluate people and force people out. We're not going to fire our way to a better set of teachers and school leaders. We have to get teachers and leaders the tools to improve. So what we're going to show you is a quick video clip that our friends at Cisco put together, and a lot of you do work with Cisco. We do at the state level. Collect the questions. We'll collect them. We're running short of time. I understand. We're running short of time. We're going to collect the questions. We're going to post them on the website. We'll take care of it. I'm going to show. This isn't a public hearing, ma'am. It's a presentation, and if I could continue, I'd appreciate that. Thank you. All right. So if we could bring the video up, and this is really a tool about how we can provide some extra tools to educators, how we can give them some tools to work with to get better, both on the student side and on the administrator side. Not going? All right, then we'll take 10 more minutes of questions. All right, so we'll take some questions. We'll collect the questions. We'll keep going. So going back to what we were going to talk about here was using technology. I mean, this was a piece about work that Cisco's done and a lot of our providers have done. You see, and I've visited schools where I've seen districts using iPad apps and both on the evaluation side and then providing sort of tools to help teachers get better, professional development resources. Can you talk a little bit about, all right, so we've done our evaluations, we've got our evaluation systems in place, we've collected data, and now we need to figure out how to make our teachers better using the data that we've collected. Can you talk a little bit about what we've seen some states do about how do we create that, make that work better?
Well, linking, this hasn't been done. We've not come across any place that we've seen this being done well yet. And that's linking the results of evaluations to professional development needs of teachers, which is really what it's all about, right? If we're going to make evaluation something that's not just punitive, but is actually helping people get better, we're going to have to figure out how to provide that professional development. And I don't think people have really begun to wrestle with this at all. I think professional development for teachers is so poorly delivered in general that the idea of all of a sudden we're going to make it more complicated by tailoring it to a teacher's evaluation results is just downright scary. So, I think, part of the problem with PD is that it's so imposed upon teachers rather than teachers figuring out with their principal about what's needed. And part of the problem is that when you're addressing a deficiency or a weakness or just something you want to work on, looking for the right place to go to get that. So, for example, my favorite is on reading instruction. A teacher maybe gets low reading scores in K-5 on reading tests. and or with her class, I mean, not her own reading. And her principal says, okay, you need to go take a reading class to learn how to teach reading better. So the odds of her going into any institution in the state and actually getting a good reading class are, by our accounts, by our measures, 1 in about 7 or 8. You know, there's very little good quality reading instruction. So what's a principal supposed to do? Because there aren't even the available resources if they were going to tap into it. So this is, I mean, not to be totally pessimistic, but
You're bumming me out.
Yeah, this is a burden. I mean, this is a really big challenge for us to figure this out.
I'm slightly more optimistic than Kate, and here's why. It actually touches on something you said. I think that what the meaningful evaluation systems are enabling to happen in terms of teachers actually getting real feedback on where their students are and in terms of which specific elements of their classroom practice they have to improve. We're getting to a place where we can actually empower teachers to find that development, to access resources that haven't been available before. And of course, Common Core has really moved that along too. But I have seen some just amazing technology pieces that are available right now, and probably the most exciting part is that they're teacher created, they're teacher developed. Right. The best ones I've seen have been where teachers are now able, because of Common Core, because they have meaningful evaluations, they're able to share lessons, they're able to share video of what works and what doesn't, down to the specific standard and element of the standard. And they're able to talk and to have these collaborations and have this connection across districts, across states, in a way that I don't think anybody's ever seen before. And so, to me, I'm optimistic that there's at least an element here where we're empowering teachers to access resources that they haven't had access to before.
Well, you're right. That technology piece is just
really exciting.
It is the answer.
Yeah.
Maine's Constitution mandates local control. Where is that any of this policy law?
Policy.
Well, excuse me, I've got questions in my hand. We have an opportunity to ask questions. We've provided you with an opportunity to ask questions. I believe both of our panelists said you have local control in Maine. Local districts are deciding about pay. Local districts are deciding about hiring. Local districts are deciding about making tenure decisions. That's the discussion that we've been having. So I've got, and actually one of the questions I've got is about that professional development key, and as we move to Common Core, is there a place where the states can start working together around this? Can we tackle this together because we've got a common set of standards?
Absolutely. And in fact, I think that's what has been opened up, really for the first time. So yeah, I think states are joining together in terms of the Common Core implementation. They're joining together in terms of developing the assessments. But again, it's the PD, it's the lesson planning, it's the curriculum planning, those sorts of things that can happen behind the scenes and are really happening in states that haven't traditionally led before as well. You know, traditionally, the bigger the state was, the more students, those were the ones that really sort of led the development of curriculum and textbooks and all of that. And that doesn't have to happen anymore either. It's who's getting out there first. It's who's innovating, who's being creative. Again, is this coming from the classroom and a bunch of different subjects? The door's wide open right now.
Right. Is there a concern, and we have a question here from Jeanette, it looks like. Is there a concern that we're overthinking this, too many standards, too many assessments, that maybe, teachers who want to be creative, teachers who want to be innovative, I mean, do we run the risk here of sort of boxing our teachers into a certain way to teach because we've built these systems to say it's got to be like this, and is there the danger that we're sort of, we're squashing that kind of creativity on the part of teachers by overworking this evaluation and professional development standards-based kind of system?
I don't know that there's anything inherent about being evaluated that squashes your creativity. I do think when you look at the Common Core standards, there's nothing inherent in the Common Core standards that squashes anyone's creativity. I mean, it doesn't tell you what to teach. It tells you what kids need to be able to do on the basis of what you've taught. So in terms of testing, I do think that that a lot of districts have responded to the pressures of testing by spending a lot of time teaching kids how to take tests. But if the tests were better, and we're hoping the new assessments coming down the pike are going to be a lot better, hopefully that won't be time wasted. That will be time spent on really good learning. That if you were teaching to a really good test, who would object? But I don't blame anyone for the pushback that's out there now about some of the teaching to the tests that we've had to do over the past 10 or 15 years.
Great. Eric, anything to add before we get done?
No, I'd agree with Kate on that.
All right, well, on that note, we will finish up with this panel, so if you could give a round of applause, I'd appreciate it. Thank you for your time.